He had no idea who she was talking to. None of them did. And I stood there in my good flannel shirt, the one my daughter had ironed for me that morning, holding a glass of sweet tea while my future daughter-in-law's mother explained to the room why her family had worked so hard to build something meaningful, like the rest of us had just stumbled into our lives by accident. I'm 64 years old. I've been in the freight and logistics business since I was 19, when I started driving the delivery truck for a regional carrier out of Knoxville, Tennessee. I didn't have a college degree. I had a strong back, a reliable alarm clock, and a father who told me that the only thing a man truly owns is his reputation for showing up. By the time I was 32, I had my own small fleet, 4 trucks, 2 drivers besides myself, a leased yard outside of Chattanooga. By 45, Harlow Freight Solutions had regional contracts with 3 major retailers and a distribution partnership with a food supplier out of Atlanta. By the time my son Andrew asked for my blessing to propose to his girlfriend last spring, we had over 200 trucks running routes from the Gulf Coast to the Ohio Valley, 3 distribution hubs, and more than 400 employees who got a Christmas bonus every single year without exception. But you wouldn't know any of that to look at me. I still wear the same Wrangler jeans I've worn since I was 25. I drive a Ram 1500, dark blue, nothing fancy. I eat breakfast at a diner called Lou's in Maryville, where the coffee costs $1.50, and the waitress knows my order without asking. My late wife Helen used to laugh at me for it. "Boyd," she'd say, "that's me, Boyd Harlow. You could buy this whole diner and you still wouldn't let me order the egg white omelet because you say it's pretentious." She was right. I'm not pretentious. I never saw a reason to start. Helen passed from a heart condition 4 years ago, not a cancer story, not a stroke, just a Tuesday morning in February when her heart decided it had done enough work. She was 61. We'd been married 38 years, and there was not a single morning since that I have not thought about her before I got out of bed. She made me promise 2 things before the end. The first was to make sure Andrew found someone who made him feel like she made me feel like the best version of himself. The second was to never let money make me stupid. "Money makes people stupid," she said, squeezing my hand in that hospital room at the University of Tennessee Medical Center. "Don't let it happen to you. You're still that skinny kid who showed up at my daddy's farm with a borrowed truck and a bunch of wild flowers you picked off the side of I-40. I told her I'd never paid for flowers in my life, and I didn't see why I should start." She laughed. That was the last good laugh we had together. I try to remember it exactly. Andrew is 31. He works in renewable energy project development, wind farms, solar installations, the kind of work that gets him out into the field in muddy boots, which I respect. He's built like me, broad through the shoulders, doesn't say much but means what he says. When he brought Cassie home for the first time, I liked her immediately. She was smart, funny, worked as a pediatric nurse in Nashville, had a way of sitting at the kitchen table like she'd already been there 100 times. Easy, comfortable, the kind of person who fits. The problem was never Cassie. The problem was Cassie's mother. Renee Whitfield was the kind of woman who introduced herself by her husband's professional title before her own name. Her husband, Gregory Whitfield, was a real estate developer in the Nashville area, commercial properties, mixed-use developments, the kind of work that involves a lot of golf and ribbon-cutting ceremonies. They lived in Brentwood, in a house that had a name. I didn't know houses in Tennessee have names until Renee told me theirs was called Whitfield Manor. I managed not to say anything about that. I met them exactly once before the engagement dinner, a brief handshake at some restaurant in Green Hills, where the menu didn't have prices, which I've always considered a form of psychological warfare. Gregory was polite enough. Quiet. Seemed a little overshadowed by his wife, honestly. Renee was the kind of woman who looked at your hands when she shook them. I saw her do it. She cocked the calluses, the blunt nails, the years of work that don't wash out. She smiled at me the way you smile at someone when you've already decided what they are. When Andrew announced the engagement, the celebration was supposed to bring both families together for a dinner in Nashville. Cassie wanted something low-key, a private room at a barbecue restaurant she loved on Nolensville Pike. Good food, the people closest to them. Reasonable. That's my future daughter-in-law. Reasonable. Renee wanted the Capitol Grill. She got the Capitol Grill. I put on my good flannel dark green, pressed, and my cleanest jeans, and I drove myself down from Maryville on a Friday night in March. Andrew met me in the parking lot, gave me a hug, and said, "Just don't let anything she says get to you, Dad," which told me everything I needed to know about how the evening's going to go. Renee was already holding court when I walked in. She had that posture, the posture of a woman who has spent decades being the most important person in whatever room she enters. Gregory stood beside her, looking like a man who had made his peace with that arrangement a long time ago. They had a few of their friends there, a couple Cassie's age from her nursing cohort, and Andrew's college roommate, a good man named Pete who I've always liked. Renee greeted me with a hug that was really more of an inspection. "Boyd," she said, "so wonderful to finally have this time together." Her eyes went to my shirt. Just for a second. Just long enough. We sat down. The food was good. I'll give that to the place. The conversation was fine at first. Toast to Andrew and Cassie. Pete told an embarrassing story about Andrew in college. Cassie cried a little during a toast her college roommate made. Normal good things. Then Renee stood up. She gave the kind of speech that starts out sounding like a compliment and slowly reveals itself to be something else entirely. She talked about Gregory's grandfather having built the first Whitfield property in Davidson County in 1951. She talked about how family legacy mattered to them, how Gregory had continued the tradition, how Andrew was joining a family with roots and standing in the community. She used the word standing 3 times. I counted. Then she said, "And I know that Cassie's coming from different circumstances, a nursing career, a practical path, a working family, and I admire that. I truly do. There's a real nobility in that kind of life." She paused, took a sip of her wine. "I think it speaks well of Cassie's character that she's been able to adapt to the world Andrew moves in. Not everyone finds that transition natural. Some people are simply more comfortable with," she searched for the word, "simpler things. And that's not a criticism. It's just a reality." She smiled at me when she said that last part. Simpler things, like I was supposed to be grateful she'd acknowledge my existence. The table went quiet in that specific way. Tables go quiet when everyone has heard something they're not sure they were supposed to hear. Cassie's hand found Andrew's under the table. His jaw had tightened. Pete was looking at his water glass with great concentration. "Mrs. Whitfield," Cassie started. "It's all right, sweetheart," I said quietly. I looked at Renee. She was still smiling, satisfied, the smile of a woman who thought she'd just said something gracious. "You're right," I said. "Different worlds." She nodded, relieved. "Exactly. And I think it's beautiful that love bridges those differences." She raised her glass. "To Andrew and Cassie." Everyone echoed the toast, but the warmth had gone out of the room. The dinner continued. I ate my steak, which was excellent, and talked to Gregory about the Titans' offensive line, which he seemed relieved to discuss. Andrew shot me looks across the table that I answered with small shrugs. "Not worth it. Let it go. Your night." During the cocktail hour after, I found myself near the window, looking out at Lower Broadway. The honky-tonks lit up below, the river beyond. My city isn't Nashville. Mine is Knoxville. Always has been. But I know this skyline. I helped freight the steel for 2 of the buildings you can see from that window. Renee found me there. "Boyd," she said, wine glass in hand, the tone of someone about to be magnanimous. "I hope nothing I said earlier came across the wrong way. I'm very fond of Cassie. I just believe in being clear-eyed about these things." "I appreciate that," I said. "Gregory and I have worked very hard to build what we have," she continued. "The Whitfield name means something in this city. Andrew is going to be part of a network, events, associations, business relationships. I just want to make sure Cassie and her family understands that world." "And you're not sure we do," I said. She gave a small, careful smile. "I think there's a learning curve for everyone. No offense to you, Boyd. You've clearly worked hard at your trade. But the world Andrew is entering, real estate at this level, the relationships, the circles, it's different. More." She searched again. Elevated. I took a sip of my sweet tea. "Could I ask what Andrew does for work?" I said. She blinked. "Renewable energy." Development projects. It's very admirable, actually. What's the largest wind project he's worked on? She hesitated. I'm not sure of the specific 240 megawatts, I said, outside of Amarillo. He managed site logistics for 18 months. I paused. You know who held the freight contract for that equipment? The turbine components? The transformer units? The cabling? I watched her face. Harlow Freight Solutions. My company. My trucks. My drivers. I looked out at the city. I didn't tell Andrew when he got that contract. Didn't see the point. He earned the job on his own. I just thought it was a nice coincidence. Renee was very still. I'm not telling you this to impress you, I said. I'm telling you because you've been explaining my world to me for the last 2 hours, and I thought you might want a fuller picture. Boyd, she started. My company has freight agreements with 4 of the top 10 commercial real estate developers in the Southeast, I said, including 2 in Nashville. I let that sit for a moment. Now, I don't know who Gregory uses for his logistics contracts. Maybe someone good. I hope so, but if he ever wanted to have a conversation about it, I'd be glad to listen. I set my glass down. Enjoy the rest of your evening, Renee. I found Andrew and Cassie near the bar. Cassie looked pale. Andrew's expression was the one he'd been wearing since the speech. Dad, Andrew said, whatever you said to her. Nothing she didn't need to hear, I said. Now stop worrying about me and dance with your fiancé. I hugged Cassie, shook Andrew's hand, and left. On the drive home up I-40, I called my operations director, a man named Roy who'd been with me for 22 years and knew every thread of the business. Roy, I said when he picked up, do we have any current or pending work with Whitfield Development out of Brentwood? A pause, keys clicking. 2 proposals, he said. 1 for warehouse delivery routing over on Murfreesboro Road. 1 they sent last week about their new mixed-use project downtown. We haven't responded to either. Put them in the hold file, I said. Don't respond, don't decline, just hold. I need to think about whether these are relationships I want to build. Personal reasons? Call it a values assessment, I said. You got it, Boyd. I spent the weekend at the house in Maryville, working in the garage, turning wood on a lathe I'd had for 20 years. I make furniture sometimes when I need to think. Nothing fancy. Bowls, small tables, things I give away. Helen used to say I processed problems with my hands, and she wasn't wrong. Andrew called me Sunday afternoon. Cassie's upset, he said. Not at you. She said her mom had that coming, but she's worried about what this means for the wedding. What do you mean? Her mom has been acting weird, Andrew said. Stressed. Snapping at Cassie's dad. She mentioned your company name a couple times like she was confused about something. She's probably done some homework, I said. Silence. Then, Dad, how much homework is she going to find? Enough, I said. Why didn't you tell her? When she was doing her whole speech, you could have just... Because if she only treats me well when she knows what I'm worth, I said, then I don't want her respect. I wanted to see who she was when she thought she had nothing to lose. Andrew was quiet for a moment. And who was she? He asked. Someone who needs to do some growing, I said. The question is whether she will. It came out fully a week later. They were all at dinner. Cassie, Andrew, Gregory, Renee, going over guest list details at the Whitfield's house, and Gregory mentioned casually that they'd been trying for months to get a meeting with Harlow Freight Solutions about their new downtown project. Good company, he said, rock-solid reputation across the region, but the owner was apparently hard to reach. Old school. Kept a low profile. Wait, Cassie said slowly. What's the owner's name? Boyd Harlow, Gregory said. Why? Cassie looked at her fiancé. Andrew looked at the table. That's my dad, he said. Gregory set down his fork. Renee didn't move. She had the expression of someone doing very fast arithmetic in their head. Andrew's father, Cassie said. Boyd Harlow, who was at the engagement dinner last week, who you gave the speech about simple lives and learning curves. Gregory turned to his wife very slowly. Renee. I didn't know, she said. You didn't ask, Cassie said, and her voice was quiet and steady. And I'm told she sounded exactly like the nurse she is. Clear, firm, no cruelty but no softness either. According to Andrew, what followed was a long and uncomfortable silence. Then Gregory excusing himself to make a phone call. Then Renee sitting very still at her kitchen table for a long time without speaking. Gregory called Roy the next morning asking about the hold status on both proposals. Roy told him they were under review and they'd be in touch. Gregory asked if there was a specific issue. Roy said we were evaluating fit. Gregory asked if it was possible to speak directly with me. Roy said he passed the message along. I didn't call Gregory back for 4 days. When I did, it was a Wednesday morning, early, sitting at Lou's with my $1.50 coffee and a plate of biscuits and gravy. Gregory, I said when he picked up. He sounded like he'd been awake for a while. Boyd, thank you for calling, he exhaled. I think you know why I was hoping to reach you. I have a guess. I want to apologize, he said, for what happened at the dinner, for what Renee said. I sat there and I didn't say anything, and that was wrong of me. I've been sitting with that all week. I hadn't expected that. I'd expected a business pitch. A transaction disguised as an apology. What did you say to her afterwards? I asked. A pause. Quite a lot, he said, most of which I should have said a long time ago. Another pause. Renee is... She grew up in a family that placed a lot of weight on appearances, social position. I've watched her do this her whole life, categorize people before she knows them. I've never pushed back the way I should have. I thought I was keeping the peace. I was just being a coward. That surprised me too. Is she going to call me? I asked. She wants to, he said. She's ashamed. She's afraid you'll hang up. I won't hang up, I said. Boyd, the proposals, he started. I'm not calling about that. I want to be clear. You don't owe us a contract. You don't owe us anything. I'm calling as Andrew's future father-in-law, not as a client. If you never do $1 of business with us, I understand that completely. I drank my coffee. I respect that, I said. I'll tell you what I told a man once who put me in a similar situation. My late wife believed that the measure of a person is how they treat the people who can't do anything for them. The parking attendant, the diner waitress, the delivery driver. That's where you see character. I paused. Your wife failed that test, but the way you're talking to me right now, that's different. That's something. I'm trying, Gregory said quietly. I know, I said. We'll figure out the rest. Renee called me that afternoon. I was on a site visit outside Knoxville, and I stepped away from the noise to take it. Boyd, she said, and then nothing for a few seconds. Go ahead, Renee. I don't know how to do this, she said. I want to apologize, but I know that if I'd never found out who you are, I might not be calling. And I know that makes the apology feel hollow. I know that. Her voice was carefully controlled the way voices are when a person is holding something in. I said things about your family, about Cassie's choices, about your background that were condescending and ignorant. I have spent my entire adult life believing that the way I grew up, the circles we run in, the associations we belong to, I believed those things made me better than other people, more capable, more worthy of respect. She stopped. I'm 62 years old, and I am just now hearing how ugly that sounds out loud. I was quiet. Cassie has been wonderful to me, Renee continued, for 3 years, and I spent those 3 years seeing her as someone who needed to be improved, who needed to be taught, and the only reason I'm sitting here questioning all of that is because of a freight company. Her voice cut slightly. That's a terrible thing to realize about yourself. It is, I agreed, but at least you're realizing it. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. Why didn't you say anything that night? When I was going on and on, you had every opportunity to stop me cold. Why didn't you? I thought about Helen, about the diner, about Andrew in mud-caked boots on a wind farm in the Texas Panhandle and how proud she would have been of him. Because the version of me that needed to win that room, I said, went away a long time ago. My wife cured me of it. I paused. And because I needed to know who you really were. Not who you'd be if you found out I could make your phone calls go unanswered. The real version. A long silence. Did you tell Cassie not to say anything about your company? She didn't know, I said. Andrew figured it out eventually. The Amarillo project tipped him off, but he respects that I don't lead with it. Money is a tool. It's not a personality. Your wife said that. My wife said a lot of useful things, I said. I'm still working through them. We talked for another 20 minutes. Not about business, about Cassie, what a remarkable woman she'd become. The kind of nurse who sits with her patients' families in the hall and explains things slowly and holds their hands. About Andrew. How he'd turned out to be a man I was proud to know. Separate from the fact that I'd raised him. About what we both wanted for them. When we got off the phone, I sat in my truck in the gravel lot outside a distribution hub I'd built 12 years ago and looked out at the East Tennessee hills for a little while. There are days when Helen's absence is very loud and days when it's just there, like weather. That day it was quiet, steady, almost companionable. The wedding was in September on a farm property outside of Franklin that Cassie had loved since she was a child. Wildflowers everywhere, string lights strung between old oak trees, a band that played actual country music, not the stadium kind. It was everything they wanted. Renee found me during the reception, between the first dance and the cake. She wasn't performing anything. She was just standing there in the early evening light, and she looked like a woman who'd been thinking hard about something for 6 months. You went easy on me, she said. I kept it proportional, I said. I mean it. She looked across the dance floor to where Andrew and Cassie were talking to Pete, laughing about something. You could have made things very difficult. For Gregory's business. For the wedding. You had every reason to. My daughter-in-law would have known it was because of her, I said. I wasn't going to do that to her. Renee nodded slowly. Gregory says you called him back. He was honest with me, I said. That counts for something. He's a better man than he looks, she said with a small, tired smile that told me she meant something by it. I've been asking him to tell me when I go too far for years. He said he didn't think I'd listen. He's probably right. She paused. I'm listening now. Better late than never. That's exactly right, I said. She glanced at my flannel. Same brand as the one I'd worn to the engagement dinner. Different color. Can I ask you one more thing? Go ahead. Do you ever dress up? I smiled. My wife's funeral, I said. Andrew's college graduation. Today I was going to, but I got down here this morning early to help set up chairs and I got a grass stain on the good shirt, so here we are. She laughed. A real one. The first one I'd heard from her. Helen would have liked that story, I said. I wish I'd gotten to meet her. She would have figured you out in about 4 minutes, I said, and then she would have handed you a job to do, and you would have done it, because that was how she made people better without making them feel small. I looked at her. She was the best person I ever knew. Renee was quiet for a moment. I believe that, she said. Gregory came and found us, put a hand on his white shoulder and gave me a nod that said something. Though neither of us needed to speak it, we'd had the longer conversation already, on the phone and over a lunch in Knoxville 2 months before, where we talked about respect and what we owed to the generation coming up behind us who were trying to build lives that were decent and real. He'd been honest with me about Renee in a way that took guts. I respected him for it. I never gave them the freight contracts. Not to punish them. That time had passed. But because I'd found 2 other firms during those months who'd earned the work fair and square, and I stand by my commitments. Gregory understood. He told me he wouldn't have expected otherwise. Maybe someday. We'll see. Later in the evening, when the band was playing something slow and Andrew was holding Cassie on the dance floor with his chin resting on top of her head, I stepped outside the tent and stood in the dark for a minute under those Tennessee stars, which are the best stars there are. And I thought about Helen in the way I do at the good moments. Not with grief, exactly, but with a fullness that feels a lot like gratitude. She would have loved this. The wildflowers. The music. The fact that our son had found a woman who made him gentle without making him soft. She would have teased me about the grass stain. On the drive home, Cassie texted me from the reception. Just a photo. Her and Andrew on the dance floor. Her head on his chest. Both of them with their eyes closed. Thank you for everything, Dad. First time she'd called me that. I pulled over on a 2-lane road outside of Lewisburg, where the trees come in close on both sides, and the stars are even better. And I sat with that for a minute. The trucks were running. 400 people who worked for me had health insurance and a Christmas bonus, and a boss who still drove a Ram 1500 and ate breakfast at a diner where the coffee cost $1.50. Andrew and Cassie were married. Renee Whitfield was somewhere back in Franklin, probably tired and maybe a little humbled, and if she was lucky, starting to hear things differently. The world doesn't change all at once. It changes one conversation at a time, one moment of honesty at a time, one person at a time, deciding to be something better than what they've been. Helen taught me that. I texted Cassie back a heart, then pulled back onto the road and headed home. I keep thinking about that drive home from Franklin the night of the wedding. The road was dark. The trees were close on both sides, and Andrew and Cassie were somewhere back in that field full of wildflowers and string lights, and I felt something I don't have a clean word for. Not pride exactly, more like rightness. Like the pieces had landed where they were supposed to. Here's what I know after 64 years, how you treat people when you think they can't do anything for you. That is the only honest version of you that exists. Everything else is performance. Renee didn't know who I was at that engagement dinner, and because she didn't know, she showed me exactly who she was. No filter, no calculation, just the raw version of a woman who had spent decades sorting people into categories and never once questioned whether the sorting was fair. That's not a character flaw you can hide forever. It comes out. It always comes out. And when it does, the consequences aren't punishment handed down from somewhere. They're just the natural result of the choices you made. Renee lost a freight contract because I genuinely didn't trust her family's judgment after what I'd seen. That's not revenge. That's just how the world actually works when you pay attention. The way you conduct yourself in the small moments determines what doors stay open and which ones quietly close, and most of the time, you never even know which ones you've closed. What I admire about the way things eventually resolved isn't that Renee apologized. Apologies are easy. What I admire is that she sat with the discomfort long enough to actually look at herself. That takes something. It takes a kind of honesty that most people spend their whole lives avoiding, because real self-examination is uncomfortable in a way that has no easy exit. She did it anyway. That matters. At 62 years old, she chose to see something she hadn't wanted to see, and then she said it out loud, and that took more courage than anything I've watched a person do in a boardroom. And Gregory surprised me most. He didn't call me to save the contract. He called me because he'd been a bystander to his wife's behavior for years, and he was finally ashamed of himself for it. That kind of reckoning, the one where you look at your own silence and decide it was a form of participation, that's hard. That's the kind of thinking that requires you to be genuinely honest with yourself, not just with other people. Helen would have said that wisdom isn't what you know. It's what you're willing to learn when learning costs you something. I have run a freight company for over 30 years. I have negotiated contracts with people who wore $1,000 suits and with people who wore the same Carhartt jacket 3 days running, and I will tell you plainly that the clearest indicator of whether someone is going to be a good partner, in business, in family, in anything, is whether they treat the person who brings their coffee the same way they treat the person who can sign their check. That's it. That is the whole test. Andrew passed that test before he was 25. Cassie passes it every single day in a pediatric ward, where the families are scared and exhausted and need someone to be steady. I am prouder of those two than I have words for. The world changes slowly, but it changes. One honest conversation at a time. One person deciding to be better than they've been. Renee is trying. Gregory is trying. That's not nothing. Helen taught me that the willingness to keep trying, even after you've gotten it wrong, especially after, is the thing that actually matters. Everything else is just noise. I drove home to East Tennessee and the stars were out and I thought, yeah, we're going to be all right.